Donna, it was surreal. Over my life, the years I've been alive, the only time I ever went to court was maybe twice for small claims when I owned my own business and people hadn't paid their bill. I'd had one, maybe two traffic tickets over the decades. I'd never been into court. I'd never been into jail. I never even knew anybody who had been to jail. I'd never met anybody. And I was arrested. My neighbors were looking at me. The officer, sheriff's officer that showed up to actually take me in, um, said, "You must be making a mistake. This is Renee from the counseling center. Her fingerprints roll. She's never been in trouble with the law. She's helps us find runaways and kids." And so he drove me down and he said, "You'll be out, just cooperate," was really nice to me. And when I got down there, they didn't let me out, and they didn't let me out. And keep in mind, I'm not going to say where, but this was in a jail that has been labeled one of the most dangerous, one of the most dirty, one of the most awful jails in the entire United States. I'm frightened. I'm crying. I'm shaking. I don't know what's gone on. I had no idea at this point that he had made up this story, because I could have told them, no, they asked me, "Did you hit him?" And I said, "No, I wasn't even here. Last night I packed my things and I left," because he was being so abusive and yelling at me. I told them, "You've been called to another property before where he bruised me and kept me from leaving for work, but I chose not to press charges because I needed to get to work and get to my job." But they never looked it up. They never checked out anything. So this goes on. I was initially put in a room by myself. It was kind of obvious I didn't belong there. This woman from Southern California who grew up in a very privileged area, and was written all over me. They were afraid if they put me in with the other people that, I could tell that they were afraid I would get attacked. Donna, it was the most frightening and humiliating thing of my life. I was strip searched with a male sheriff's officer standing right outside the open door by a female officer. And I broke down and cried so much that she eventually stopped. But my private parts were violated in this search, and it was really overkill. I kept thinking to myself, how could this happen in America? What is going on? And eventually I was fingerprinted, photographed, put into a cell with a bunch of other women. And there were some young girls in there who had been arrested and were crying. And I'm a Christian. I remember singing the hymnal from my church when I was in that cell by myself, from page 1 to page 229, and them coming in and yelling at me, stop singing. And I said, I don't know what else to do. I just sang to myself every hymn. Somehow I could recall it from childhood. And it gave me a lot of comfort. But then as I saw the other prisoners being abused, I reached out to them. And one girl, I gave her a hug and I said, I know you're frightened and you're scared. I am too. Would you like me to pray for you? And in walked one of the female sheriffs. She says, "That's it. You're not supposed to touch anybody." And off I went. And unbeknownst to me, my fingerprints came back just fine in the county I was in, because I've never been in trouble with the law. I had to maintain my entire career, a clean record to work in the social service industry. And I was put upstairs, and what I was told was nobody was getting out because the national system to check if you have warrants in other states was down. And I was put in a jail cell in an orange jumpsuit in somebody else's underwear and shoes, given a bucket, and I was put in a cell. The place was overcrowded because they weren't able to release anybody from the jail. And I was put in a cell with 9 women accused of accessory to murder.
I'm Donna Anderson, and this is True Love Fraud Stories. Today we're going to tell you an outrageous yet classic tale of sociopathic seduction. It involves a professional woman who worked for philanthropic organizations and the con man who targeted her. The con man has a history of vindictiveness, so to protect the woman, we aren't using any names. We'll call them Renee and Mark. Now, in hindsight, it is obvious that Mark was running a scam, but it sure didn't seem that way in the beginning. Renee had dealt with her share of tragedy in her life. When Mark came along and promised her the world, it seemed like it was all meant to be. I felt like I was caught up in a Hallmark movie, she said. Renee grew up in the epicenter of movies, Southern California. In fact, she compared her childhood to the TV show Leave It to Beaver.
A lot of the freeways we have weren't even freeways when I was born. And it was an idyllic, 50s, 60s community. It was, exactly what you see, beaver cleaver type lifestyle that you would see on television.
When Renee went to kindergarten, she already knew how to read. The whole family was highly intelligent, and her older brothers and sisters had taught her.
So I would kind of just check out in class. So finally in third grade, they sent me to the school psychologist who said, had you take these IQ tests twice. You're one of the smartest people in our school. And prior to this, I had been in what was called adaptive PE for kids who had no coordination. My teachers thought, I was just spacing out, and I was allowed to go to a GATE program for other kids just like me, and I blossomed. And that man, speaking that into my life, you can tell I'm a talker, and I haven't shut up talking since, because he really spoke into me. I wasn't a particularly beautiful child. I wasn't particularly gifted, but when he told me I was smart, I ran with it, and it just resonated with my soul.
After elementary and high school, Renee went to college, where she joined a sorority. Through that organization, she had an opportunity to help the community and earn respect. Her sorority sisters became a big part of her life.
Now in reflection, decades later, those people that I met there have been the most supportive of me my entire life. They are like family. There's no other way to describe it. They would do anything for me. So there was one point in the relationship you and I are going to talk about where my abuser told me, when I was sharing, about my sorority sisters and how we'd stayed in touch over the decades, he said, "Oh, you had to buy your friends in college."
A year and a half after that brutal accusation, when Renee was divorcing Mark, sorority sisters accompanied her to every court hearing. One of them was Sarah.
So Sarah walked right up to him and said, "Renee bought me, decades ago, and I come with a lifetime guarantee."
Mark wasn't Renee's first husband. When she was 28, a male friend was applying for a job, and she provided him with a reference. Her friend then told Renee that his new employer, Cameron, wanted to meet her.
And for a year, I just kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And finally, one day he called me, and he was described to me, Donna, as a very smart person, most intelligent person I'd ever known. And I just pictured him as a kind of a nerd with a plastic pocket protector and those old-fashioned slide rules. And then, And he called me and he said, "I'm going to be in town at a conference, and if you don't come and meet me for lunch, I'm going to come over to your office because I really would like to meet you." And so I met him at lunch, and I walked in, and he was this amazing Scottish guy with the red hair and the beard, and kind of hulky, and just funniest person I've ever met, brilliant sense of humor. And right then I remember sitting there, and we were at a diner in a Holiday Inn. And I remember saying to myself, I think I'd like to marry this guy. And I'd never thought that about anyone before. So fast forward, I did get to marry him, and we had 3 children. And when my children were young, he got very sick, with what we thought was a common cold, and passed away within just days from it, not realizing that it had been a very bad sickness attacking the lungs. And so I became a widow and raised my children by myself for many, many years.
Renee's children were 9, 11, and almost 14 when Cameron died. Making the loss even more poignant, their oldest had spent 2 years battling childhood cancer and had finally overcome it.
And so my child got cancer-free. We went on a Make-A-Wish trip to Scotland in August, and by the beginning of the following year, my husband had passed away. So very traumatic for my children, but I still feel extremely blessed that we got that opportunity, even though it came from my child having a terminal illness, and that child is an adult, alive, and doing well. So, it was very difficult for the children, because we were finally at a place where our family wasn't focused on the sadness and the grief of going through a childhood illness like that. And then just months later, it was the sadness and the grief of losing their dad that they loved so much.
Cameron had a BMW convertible and was known for driving around town with his 3 kids, singing tunes from the 70s and 80s. He was involved in their sports leagues and also supported Renee in her work.
I went into, and still do, work in the field of philanthropy and helping different communities. I've done work nationally all the way down to my local little hometown, helping. And he was always so proud of me, and our whole family would get involved in philanthropy together. And that's an unusual man who will give up golf, which he loves so much, to go to a walkathon, or he would go to a patient a home of a patient that we were helping through one of my organizations, and install a wheelchair lift, stuff he didn't even know how to do. He would just go do it, and left a huge gap in our community, in our family, and certainly for me.
If you're wondering if someone in your life is a narcissist, sociopath, or psychopath, and you need advice on escape and recovery, talk to Donna. Donna Anderson, author of LoveFraud.com and host of True Love Fraud Stories, offers personal consultations. Since she founded Love Fraud in 2005, Donna has collected more than 10,000 cases, so she's probably heard a story like yours before. You're certainly not alone. Donna is also a certified Reiki master. Reiki is a healing approach for stress reduction and relaxation. Donna combines this with her deep emotional release technique to help you let go of the pain of your experience. Book your session today at lovefraud.com/talk to Donna.
Renee was married for 15 and a half years. After her husband passed, she spent all her time working to support her family. Occasionally, she dated other men, sometimes hoping for help with household chores. But she focused on her kids and was glad that she did. Eventually, Renee hit a certain age, which she didn't want to disclose, and was feeling a bit down. Her friends invited her to an all-years high school reunion. Because she and her siblings had graduated from the same high school, she knew lots of people and decided to go, at least for a little while.
I was actually leaving the high school reunion to go have a small reunion with some of my friends from college, including a man I had dated in college. And in walked this man who, when I was younger and 12 years old, had been in one of my brother's classes, and I had a huge crush on him, kind of a surfer dude. Didn't really know much about him. Pretty sure he didn't know anything about me. And at a certain point, he and I had both worked at a same after school job, and he never really paid any attention to me. But that night he came in and he was paying attention to every woman in the room, and kept me from leaving and engaged me in conversation. But I remember thinking, oh, wow, he really isn't all that handsome like I remember. And I'm an empath, and he started telling his story of his most recent divorce and his elderly mother and all of the things that had recently gone on in his life. And I'm an empath, and I listened. And that was hook number one.
Mark was in California from out of state, visiting his sick mother. One of Renee's friends gave him her phone number. A couple of days later, Mark invited her to meet him halfway between their locations for dinner. She remembers thinking, my kids are grown. Why not?
And I went, and it was a beautiful setting by the coast. And looking back, he sat and he asked me all kinds of things about my life, and just began to mirror everything about me. Oh, you're into community service. I'm into community service, he would say. Oh, you go to church. Oh, I'm very involved in my church. I'm best friends with my pastor in the state where I'm coming from. And it just seemed kind of too good to be true. I felt like I was caught up in a Hallmark movie, or, somehow at some point I remember chuckling to myself that this was just too good to be true. It was almost scripted. And looking back, he took me out after we had dinner, out into public was where he gave me this first kiss. And now looking back, it was kind of staged, like an actor, because it was done in front of other people who applauded or were egging him on because he was being so loud about how wonderful I was and kissing me in front of all these people. And I can laugh about it now. But that was really the moment I fell into a trap. It was an absolute con. It was an absolute trap. And it took me a couple of years to figure that out.
Mark and Renee next went to a 24-hour diner where they stayed up talking until 4 a.m. Mark told Renee a lot of stories about his life. He said he was a decorated military veteran. He said he was successful in banking and real estate. He vilified his most recent wife.
He just presented himself, just larger than life, and this person who had just been so maligned and so misunderstood, and, really talked, some of the language, the evil ex-wife, the stories. He was always the victim in every story. After I woke up to what I had been dealing with, none of it turned out to be true, including a lot of the medical maladies that were shared with me. I later have learned they just can't possibly be true.
But Renee didn't know that yet. At the time, she felt like she was living a dream.
I joke with people now, but I say, note to self, do not base who you get involved in a relationship with on how you felt as a 12-year-old smitten girl. And I just kind of went back to that smitten girl thing. I kind of idealized, and he helped set this up. He was telling me how I feel. Oh, isn't it wonderful that you had a crush on me, and now God has, he brought God into it, which started telling, and I started believing it, that, after being a widow all these years, and God, he would tell me how I was feeling. And looking back onto it, my gut right away really did have some red flags and some unsettledness. Even that first date, how he talked to me on the phone, I wasn't even sure if I was really going to drive all that way. I remember showing up a half an hour late because I really had my gut was telling me not to go. And so there really wasn't much of it, but he turned into a charming person. I later learned he had been part of an acting group and had headshots done and really considered himself an actor. And yeah, had even told me he had starred in certain movies, but you can find nothing about it. Yeah, he was acting all right. He just turned on the charm, the smiles, the words, the finding out, that one of my greatest disappointments in life was there's a famous Christian author named Lisa Turquoise who's written a book called This Isn't How It's Supposed to Be. And I kind of had taken that on as my mantra that this isn't how my life was supposed to be. I had a husband, I had 3 children. We were living in a beautiful home, close to the beach. This isn't how my life was supposed to be. And I opened myself up to him on that. And he just prayed on it, painting this picture of how great my life would be with him. I guess the term you all use for it is future faking. And he turned on the charm and became this incredibly attractive person to me with all this charm.
Mark went back to the state where he lived, but sent Renee notes twice a day.
Handwritten letters, very flowery, very complimentary, very picturesque. I'm sitting here looking out over my rose garden and thinking of you. And so I was getting all these letters and texts and phone calls, and it was over the top.
A few months into her involvement with Mark, Renee and another male friend went to a conference in Canada. They didn't room together, but Mark threatened to tell her family that she was having a clandestine relationship. It wasn't true, but the accusation was upsetting. Renee was in tears.
I came back and then, he apologized, but it was all fake. So I fell for it. And then the love letters started not being handwritten. They started being typed, which now I know and learned later after I discovered that I had been the victim of abuse. He was sending the same letters to other women. And so typing it made it easy just to change the name at the top and mail it to another address. And I'm chuckling now, but I remember thinking, why is he not handwriting them anymore? And I asked him, he goes, oh, well, you said sometimes it's hard to read my handwriting. There was always a plausible answer for these things that in my gut just set off what I now know are red flags. And there was always an element of truth, always a little element of believability, and he could pull it off at the drop of the hat.
Mark invited Renee to visit him. When she arrived, he presented her with a beautiful ring, which at first she declined. Later, after much cajoling from Mark, she accepted it as a friendship ring. By this point, Mark was making plans to move to California to be with her. But before then, Renee invited him to a professional conference in Las Vegas.
And I'm the last person, Donna, who would ever get married in Vegas. I had friends who got married in Vegas, and I would refuse to go to their weddings. Shame on me, because I just didn't think it was real. But he really worked his magic on me. I was there being installed as a leader of a large national organization, and everybody else had a spouse, and he just talked me into being his spouse.
The last thing Renee wanted was a gaudy Las Vegas wedding. But Mark convinced her that after a courthouse ceremony, they'd have a real church wedding. Renee relented, but was clear about her preferences.
I just want a Christian pastor, no Elvis. So we arrive at the wedding chapel, and I wish I could show you the picture of the wedding chapel, because one of his favorite selfies he took with me is there was a sign out front that said "Pretend Weddings, $49." And he thought it was fun for us to take a picture with him pointing to the sign. And it's almost like the foreshadowing in a Dickens novel. Like, he knew it was a pretend wedding, but I didn't. And you should see the smile on his face in that photo. You know, he thought that was so funny. And we arrive, and guess what? It was a pastor, really nice man who was a Christian pastor, but his big claim to fame was dressing like Elvis. I was so frightened. It was such a shabby little place. They tried to give me plastic flowers to hold, which I refused. I remember carrying my purse down the aisle because I was afraid it was going to get stolen. The rings he had ordered, he hadn't even bothered to make sure that they would fit on my hand. So when it came time to put the ring on my finger, he actually put the ring in his mouth and put saliva on it and slid it on my hand. And here this Elvis preacher is saying, I've seen a lot of things over the years, but I've never seen that.
Renee hadn't told her children that she was getting married, but Mark made sure they knew about it.
This man had love bombed me and had sent flowers to my house without me knowing, that said, will you marry me? So my kids had opened the card. It was their house. The flowers were in the house. And they figured it out. They went right on the Clark County website and saw it. And they were deeply disappointed in me, as they should have been. How I got conned so quickly into making a man more important than the most precious things I have on this earth, my children, speaks to the level of how a woman or, a man or somebody who's being conned by one of these people, how quickly they take advantage of our vulnerabilities and flip everything around. It really alienated my children. But as I said, they were good and loving people, so they tried to accept him and tried to keep him involved in activities with us.
Still, even though Renee had gone through with the wedding, she had misgivings.
My gut told me, it's not real. And my gut would always go back to, I married him in Vegas, and that night when I went to sleep, I remember thinking I had made the worst decision in my life. And everything kept going back to that night, the night that I had married him. I remember the constant feeling of, oh, it feels so good to not sleep alone. And boy, I better keep one eye open, because this person could lose it on me at any time.
As soon as they were married, Mark started telling Renee more outrageous stories. He told her that because his ex-wife refused to get their cat fixed, he threw the kittens out in the snow and made his children watch as wolves ate them. He kept unregistered guns in the house and knew that Renee was uncomfortable with them. But when she was angry, he asked her if she wanted to take a gun and shoot him.
I started introducing him to people that I knew. This is my inappropriate husband, Mark. So whatever he says is not a reflection on me if you choose to have a conversation with him. Because like most narcissists, he would tell these outlandish, grandiose stories. One turned out to be a MacGyver episode where he said he saved somebody by putting a pen in their trachea. I guess I hadn't seen that MacGyver episode or whatever it was. He would talk about being in the military and holding dying babies in his arms. And during our divorce, I found out he was only in the military 8 months and before he was released. He would wear a hat that had a certain title on it that he claimed to be in the military. Well, in order to complete that training, it takes a minimum of 1.5 years. So he could have never been that. And I had no idea, but my friends who were, high up, retired colonels and different people, or retired captains in the Navy or different places were saying this person couldn't have been in the military that long or at all. They don't know the language for the career they claim to have had. He would go wearing this hat into businesses that were veteran owned and get free meals and talk it up as if he had been this decorated service person. And now there's a certain side of me that wishes I could go back in those photos and rip the hat off his head. It's stolen valor. It truly is.
Signs that Mark wasn't a true marriage partner appeared, but Renee didn't recognize how important they were.
And he just continued with this inappropriate language. Things weren't adding up. I remember he wasn't contributing to the bills. So one time I just let the electricity bill go and said, hey, the electricity is going to get shut off if you don't pay it. So, he finally did write me a check for $2,000 and left it on my pillow with an apology note. And it sucked me right back in. Hoovered again. And then on our first anniversary, I was helping teach at a local college, a little summer class, and he was supposed to pick me up and take me to dinner, and he picked me up and said, I'm moving to my mother's property in a mountain community, and if you don't want to move with me, our marriage is over. And so being a good Christian woman I said, I gotta try, I'll be embarrassed. A lot of it was what a lot of women I now know, they're embarrassed that they got into this situation. We're empaths, we spend our life fixing things. So, I can fix this. Sounds good to me. Move with me to the mountains, we'll buy a home, VA, no money down. And I really didn't want to do it. But I ended up selling my home very quickly for a lot less than it was worth, getting rid of 3/4 of my possessions, and moving away from my prestigious job, my family, and everyone to this very rural area. And I now know that's what I was being targeted, was to be isolated, away from everybody. So nobody could see what was going on. I mean, all along he'd been exploding at me with anger, making weird comments, accusing me of things that I couldn't possibly have done. Like, you didn't feed me dinner on time and I have low blood sugar. Are you trying to kill me? Just irrational things. And I just kept writing it off to, oh, that's just the way he is. Or his dad had died when he was a kid. So I have to have, compassion on him. And what was funny is the organization I was working for at the time was a mental health organization. And so I used all my best language to try to cope with him. But we didn't talk about personality disorders. We were in the business of helping families who had loved ones with treatable mental health disorders. I knew nothing about narcissism or sociopathy or...
The caring, attentive man that had sent Renee handwritten love letters early in their involvement was gone. But she was stuck. She had left her job and sold her home to be with him.
The mask was off and the ugly person came out. And my home had been sold. I had nowhere to live. My things were in moving pods, what was left of what he didn't give away. And I remember on the final night I moved out of my house, he slept. We stayed in a local Best Western, and he slept while I went to the restaurant next door and met up with my kids and some of our family friends. And I didn't sleep. I just cried. There was this sinking feeling again that I'd had that night that I married him. I am just made the worst decision in my life. And I don't know where it came from, because I was trying to be so happy that I was moving and going to have this idyllic life, and I wasn't going to have to work hard and somebody was going to take care of me.
When they first moved to the rural community, Renee and Mark lived in the home owned by his mother, while their new mountain house was being built.
About a week before closing on the home, the bank calls me and said, when are you going to put down your $100,000? And I said, what? This is a 0% down loan. And throughout this time where I'd been living, off property while this house was being built, he had been doing incredibly abusive things to the point where at one point the police were called. He held me down over a couch, put bruises on me, kept me from going to work. And this was all testified to in family court in transcripts. He admitted to punching the wall next to my head. He threw things at me. He would lock me out in it would snow there. So he would sometimes lock me out in the snow and say, there's the door, don't let it hit you where the good Lord split you. But these things would happen, and then he would apologize.
Renee accepted Mark's apologies, believing that she was doing the right thing as a Christian wife. Finally, the new house was ready. They were supposed to start their new life together in their new home. And then Mark made a shocking announcement.
Around Valentine's Day, I got the keys to the house, and he says to me, I'm going to the blind center at the VA. I said, what are you talking about? You're not blind. You play on video games on the phone. Mark, you read the backs of my credit cards because my vision's bad. And I believed it. I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. So here I thought I had this disabled veteran on my hands at this point who was now losing his eyesight. And I was mortified. So I had to move everything into this new house pretty much by myself and was left alone for 6 weeks. I remember coming to the place we were living, and I was in tears. I go, how can you go into the hospital for something like this and me not know about it? You've never shared anything about this with me, and it's Valentine's Day. So I came in, and my prior husband, I said, was my best friend, but he always forgot holidays. And there were Valentine's cards, bottles of wine, roses, presents, a teddy bear, all left by my abuser in the house with this most beautiful Valentine's card I'd ever received. And I sat there looking at it going, oh, he must really love me, and he's losing his eyesight, and I committed myself right then and there to help him no matter what I could do, because I was just, my love language is gifts, little gifts.
Still, Renee couldn't figure out how her husband functioned if he were so visually impaired. He played games on his phone. He drove his car in bad weather.
It didn't add up. How do you drive if you've got significant vision loss and you have to be inpatient? How do you drive yourself on the ice and the snow, down windy roads? Even if you've got peripheral vision loss, which is what Mark claims, the one thing you need to drive on a windy mountain road in the ice and the snow is peripheral vision. It just, at the time, I didn't question it, because, you get a credible organization like the VA saying that this is happening. Do you doubt them? But I started asking questions, and and then he was released from there, and after 6 weeks, was learning to walk with a white cane, was given computers with like Braille and auto speak. All this stuff was coming to our homes, board games with Braille on it. And yet the entire time he was playing video games on his cell phone and watching television and driving anywhere in this inclement weather. And at the time, I didn't question it, but I should have. And it was just like more and more benefits. So I do know from my research that there are 2 things that you can add to your VA benefits for. One is loss of limb, and the other one is loss of sight. And so he did start receiving payments for loss of sight. And he was also receiving quite a substantial payment for being married to me. That was one of the reasons why I married him, was like, he was going to get this money, and I was going to be supported, and I was going to get health insurance. I went to use that VA health insurance, Donna, for the very first time, and they said the VA is not covering you. And I said, what? And so I called the VA, and they said, well, ma'am, he can't have 2 wives on his insurance. He had never told the VA that he had been divorced.
Mark said it wasn't his fault that she wasn't on his health insurance. Then he said the VA needed Cameron's death certificate, although he wasn't clear on why. Renee gave it to him. About this time, Renee also started seeing a new type of weirdness.
And I began getting odd texts and photographs. Like one of them was a woman with bunny ears sitting on his lap. Another text was talking about taking one of the patients out drinking and smoking cigars. And it was just odd to me because I'm this empathic person and I'm thinking my spouse is completely losing their eyesight for life. What does going to a bar with bunny ears have to do with therapy for getting well? And then I'm having these, I'll give you an example. He was learning to walk with a white cane and I got a call. Can you bring my cane? Can you drive 100 miles and bring me my cane? I left it at the house. Well, if you were needing to use a white cane to walk, and I think at the time they were just trying to teach him how to do it. But if you were seriously going blind, and you wouldn't leave your white cane with the red tip behind, you'd take it with you because you need to learn this because you're losing your sight. And things were just not adding up for me. I even went and supported, they had a graduation ceremony for him graduating from this program, and I was supportive, and I got up and spoke and said something loving and touching. I must have looked like a fool. So anyway, he comes back. We have 2 amazing days. He's actually helping me around the house, and I'm having this really great glimmer of hope. And then the person with the mean, crazy comments, violent comments, started coming out 10 times worse.
This was right before Easter. Renee had invited her children to visit for the holiday. They had never seen her new home.
And I was getting the home ready to have my children over for Easter. And he told me that he wanted a divorce and he wanted half the house. I mean, literally, he had just come back and he said he wanted a divorce. You can't have your children up here. And it escalated to the point where I said, you can't call the police on me for having my children over for Easter. He walked over, picked up the landline phone and said, oh yeah, watch me.
There was no violence. Still, Mark called the sheriff.
That was the worst abuse of all. I called them from my phone to tell them what was going on. There was no violence. I had put up notices that a paralegal had written for me that my house was not for sale. Please do not enter. But he was angry about that and screaming at me about it. But, there was no physical violence going on. So he went outside and met with these rural sheriffs, and unbeknownst to me, made up a story that I had hit him the night before. And I'm chuckling because if you were to see and reread what he said, there's no way physically that it could have happened. He said I struck him in the face and damaged his glasses. I had text messages showing him yelling at me because I had put moving boxes. Now remember, I'm moving, I'm unpacking, I'm trying to get my house ready for guests. And I had put moving boxes on his glasses and bent them. I have the texts. But he told them a completely different story. So they came in and asked me to leave. And I said, fine, I'll go visit with my children where they live. But may I take my belongings with me? He had moved in one of his children who had a lot of run-ins with the police and a lot of mental health challenges.
Renee wanted to take her valuables so they wouldn't be stolen and sold for drugs or alcohol.
And my keys were sitting in the house. And the officer had my license. And so I went out with my jewelry and my things from my safe. And my car was locked in, but I didn't have my keys. I walked back in the house and the officer said to me, that's it. I told you to leave. It's shift change and we're just taking you in. You're not cooperating.
That's how Renee, who had never been in trouble in her life, ended up in jail. She was terrified and did not know what to do.
And at one point I'd been able to pick up the phone, and you could only call people within the area code, and I was new. I didn't know anybody. So one of the girls knew their bail bondsman's number, and he patched me through to one of my children, and that child's a part-time pastor, and he was able to give me a Bible verse before the phone went dead. And when I got upstairs, this young Black girl, she doesn't even wish, 100 pounds wet, looked at me and she said, "Ma'am, you've got to stop crying or you're not going to make it out of here. And you look like a person who might read the Bible." And she said, "I'm the only person on the west side of the jail that's got a Bible. May I read you the Bible?" And we went over in the corner and she read me the same verse my son had said to me. And at that moment, I trusted this woman. And she was with me there for those whole 3 days. And because I had come in last, they were letting people out. The clothing we had menstrual stains on it. Women in jail aren't given menstrual things. They have to save money to buy them. The toilet in the cell next door was being overflooded, and I refused to go eat. While everybody else went to eat, I would stay behind and use the toilet. I'd never used facilities in front of anybody in my life. They never even gave me the ability to make phone calls. So here are gang members and tattooed people giving me their phone time so I can reach out and try to find my family. And I finally get hold of one of my oldest son. And he's about to leave for business, and he says, "Mama, I'm coming to get you." And finally, after 3 days on Easter morning, I walked out into the lobby, and my son was there.
I'm Donna Anderson, and this is True Love Fraud Stories. Renee was released from jail, but now she had to deal with her husband, who was mean, angry, and vindictive. In the next episode of True Love Fraud Stories, Renee shares how she divorced him as quickly as possible in California. 6 months, 6 days, 3 hours, and 4 minutes. Yes, she counted. This was in spite of the fact that Mark did not want to let her go on with her life. Renee also shares how she used what she learned through this terrible experience to help other abused women. Be sure to listen. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Within 4 months of reconnecting with him, I was married to him. Something Donna, I never would have done, but the trust factor was there. We had a lot of the same friends. We had the same growing up. I had said, "Okay, you want to marry me? We'll go to premarital counseling." And imagine me calling this large church with premarital, who had a counselor there, and saying, "Well, I'm already married now." So it's going to be marriage counseling, not premarital counseling. I look back how foolish I look, but if it's one thing I've learned from listening to your podcast or reading other women who've gone through this sort of, sociopath, narcissist path, is they go after people like me who, remember the psychiatrist? He told me I was smart, I was intelligent. And I learned, it took me a long time to learn, but I believe now I was his target because I am smart and I am a good person and I am all the things that he wasn't. And he got what now I've been told, Donna, you probably know a lot about it, like a duping delight, a chemical rush out of fooling this smart woman. I now know I wasn't chosen because there was anything wrong with me. I was actually targeted because, hey, she's pretty smart. Let me take her down.
True Love Fraud Stories is produced by lovefraud.com. For more information about this story, other great stories, Or if you'd like to share your story, visit podcasts.lovefraud.com. Engineering is by Terry Kelly. To learn how to recognize and recover from everyday sociopaths, visit lovefraud.com. You'll find articles, books, and webinars. You can also book an appointment with me, Donna Anderson, for advice about your personal experience with someone who may be a sociopath. I'm also a certified Reiki master, so I can help you to let go of the pain of your experience. Book your session today at lovefraud.com/talk to Donna.